All right. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our RSA Remote on finding and planning early career research leave. My name is Karrieann Soto Vega, and I'm Assistant Professor of Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies at the University of Kentucky. This is actually my last year serving as an early career representative for the RSA board. And so I wanted to start having a more direct conversation about matters that concern early career faculty. So I wanted to say for everyone who's joining the call or watching later, please let us know if you have any ideas about concerns that you would like the society to address. And if you can't find me, then you can talk to Debbie Haughey, who serves as the chair of the Career Development Committee for RSA at this point. So I want to thank the wonderful panel of contributors to the conversation who agreed to talk about their experiences, expertise on or having research leaves, seeking them out, maybe even what to do during them. I'll briefly introduce them, and then they will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes, after which we will have time for questions and hopefully just a more free-flowing conversation. First, I should note that one of our panelists and someone who is also serving in the Career Development Committee, Anita Mixon, could not join us today due to her giving birth. Which brings me to a caveat. We are aware that everyone has a variety of personal circumstances that may come to the fore as we consider what to do during a research leave. And we honor those whose lives have been upended by the COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical conflicts. We know that these historical events deeply affect the capacity of functioning through a business as usual approach. Hopefully we'll make some space to talk about that later. And I also wanted to acknowledge how some of our colleagues are in teaching intensive institutions. So this conversation may look a little differently, but I know how some folks, have had to rely on requesting funds to have breaks over the summer where research can progress more steadily. So hopefully in that vein, we can kind of put those two together. For now, let me briefly introduce Amy Lueck. Did I say it correctly? Yes. Okay. Associate Professor of English at Santa Clara University. Timothy Oleksiak, Assistant Professor of English at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And David Gold, Professor of English, Education, and Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Michigan. Welcome. And so let's just have Amy kick it off. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just share my screen. I have a couple. So I gave my presentation here a little title because this is what I said I would talk about, and it's timely for thinking about Anita's experience, because I had a similar experience, and that really kind of structured my way of thinking about my own research leaves. So my background, as Karrieann mentioned a little bit, is I did my PhD in 2015, I completed it from the University of Louisville. And then I came to Santa Clara University as an assistant professor, and I am at teaching. I don't know if I would call it teaching intensive, but we see ourselves as a teaching institution. So there is a large teaching expectation here alongside an increasingly intense research expectation, as so many institutions have begun to do. So I had availed myself of some of these kind of summer stipends that Karrieann was gesturing to earlier in the first part of my time here. And I had successfully written and submitted a book to a press in 2017. But what I was, oh, and here's the book. And so it was published several years later. So when I came to my mid-probationary review, which is what I'm going to kind of think a little bit through today, it was a leave that was scheduled by my university at halfway during, on your approach to tenure. Really generous thing, something you should maybe consider negotiating for if you haven't applied for jobs yet. It's not something I knew to ask for, but was fortunately something that was already built in. So I had this leave coming up, and because I had already had this other project in the works, I was at this weird place where I didn't have enough to do on that project that was going to be a good proposal for my research leave. But I also was responsible for that book still, because it hadn't come out yet. It was coming out a couple of years later. But I needed to think about my next project. So I proposed for my next project. I proposed my next project for my mid-probationary review, and mid-probationary, we call it junior faculty development leave, which was going to take place in 2018. And I was going to work on this new project on public memory at the Winchester Mystery House. And so I had done some work on this, and then record scratch. I had a baby. So that really changed things for me. I had a baby in the fall of 2018, and my leave was supposed to happen that year. So my leave got kicked back a couple of quarters. That was the first thing I did, on the advice of a colleague, Julia Voss, actually, who's in the field. She had a similar experience, and she said, don't have your research leave right on the heels of your maternity leave, your paternity leave, or your parental leave. And I thought that was really great advice. So what I did was, I was fortunate enough to have a little bit of flexibility around when it would occur. And I kicked my research leave back so that I taught 1 quarter in between my parental leave and my research leave. And what that allowed me to do was to kind of reset, and it didn't just get absorbed into my parental leave and the time space of that, and instead kind of helped me to reestablish some boundaries and some routines in my life. And it also helped me to, but nonetheless, though, right, like work looked different after that, right? It wasn't like, okay, now I'm back to normal. And it helped me to find out what work could look like in this new context. And that's a really important thing that I want to kind of emphasize today. This, by the way, is my daughter and I in the image here at the Winchester Mystery House. So work looked different, right? She came with me on these site visits, and I had my notes, and I had her in the carrier, and she's now a part of that story, and she's a part of that project, and my kind of embodied experience of it is part of, that's how I think about it. And so that's really neat. But it's again, it's different. It's different from what I expected. It's a different project than I would have written. So what I want to kind of talk about today is the ways that this has been a kind of disruption and an opportunity in this project. But also I want to spend a little bit of time just sharing some of the strategies that were really helpful for me in coming up with more realistic, flexible goals to move this project forward incrementally on a timeline that was really radically different from what I had expected. And to really just emphasize being kind to yourself as you set up those structures, and just really some tricks. So I wanted to start with the kind of basic trick, which is like in no way research based, and some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is a little bit more reputable. But I always set my watch like 5 minutes early, and I am always thinking I'm a little bit behind schedule because of that, right? It's one of these things that I do. I always keep just a little bit of money in my bank account so that I always feel like there's just not that much, because things always take longer than I think they're going to, and they always take more resources than I think they're going to. So one little piece of advice that I have come to is just to anticipate. I mean, and we've all kind of come to this through the disruptions of the last few years, that realization that part of your plan should be anticipating setbacks and complications, and that things are going to be taking longer and they're going to be harder often than you expected. And sometimes they aren't. And then that's such a victory that you're like, wow, that was easy. But it's really helpful to me to kind of expect now that my toddler is going to be noisy, or, you know, and I'm going to have a disrupted workspace, or that things are going to come up. But I also wanted to spend a little bit of time here sharing some actual good advice, besides just my own folksy wisdom. And I wanted to really lift up some of the strategies of this particular enterprise for those of you who may not be familiar. The National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity has a program called the Faculty Success Boot Camp. And so much of what made me kind of agile and adaptable during my research leave under the conditions that it was, which you might notice also, of course, the timing of COVID shortly after that research leave. And so I'll just, as a sidebar, say that since 2018, when my daughter was born, into the present, we have never had childcare. We have an unbroken pattern of home parenting during this time. So that challenge really continued for so many of us. But the things that I had learned in the Faculty Success Program are really what have helped to sustain me over the last few years. And so one of those things is SMART goals. And so, but some of this is really familiar, and I apologize if everyone's like, yeah, we all know this, but I didn't. I didn't know these things. And they've really helped me. So SMART goals is this really great way of thinking about what you're setting out to do and framing it for yourself. In terms of this heuristic. So SMART, the S is specific. And in my example, I'll just talk about my own project as a kind of example and a touch point to ground these ideas and principles. But so specific means my goal for my research leave wasn't that I was going to make progress on this project. It was really important that I get a specific sense of what exactly I thought I could accomplish. And again, it was helpful to go back to work first for a minute so that I had a better sense of what that was. And I realized that it was a lot less than what I had thought. And instead of, having whatever it was I might have accomplished, I decided that my goal was to revise an article that I had already drafted around this project, and to begin a draft of a book proposal. So to have one kind of piece a little bit more firm on this book project, and also to start to see what the boundaries of the larger project might be. I'm going to speed through these a little bit because I'm already talking a lot, but next one is measurable, just making sure that that whatever your goals are, you actually know whether you've accomplished them or not, to keep yourself on track. So that goes back to that sense of like timing and measuring things to know, how will I know whether I need to do something different, whether I need to pivot my plans. They need to be measurable. Achievable is the most important one in a lot of ways, right? Like don't set yourself up to fail and to feel bad about it. Don't have unrealistic goals that are going to leave you in the lurch. Relevant is a pretty straightforward one. Things that are going to help you in your career if you're at a teaching institution. What are the articles that are valued? What are the pieces of work that are valued? And time bound. So this is pretty clear in this regards, that the research leave is usually the time that we're talking about. So what can you actually do in that time? Some of the strategies that helped me from Faculty Success Boot Camp that I just want to really quickly share are Put things on the calendar, have a long-term and a short-term strategic plan, and return to them and revise them as necessary, but have a really clear sense of how that parses out through backwards planning, right? Just like you would in your class. What are the pieces of this project, the little things, the research, the drafting, that the pieces that have to happen, and how do they calendar out? Having a sense that you're not alone. Accountability and networks, accountability groups, connecting at conferences. One of the things I did is I had a really soft, low stake backstop for my book proposal draft. By proposing it to FEMRET conferences, mentoring. So I just had to have something, right? I didn't say I'm going to propose it. I didn't say I'm going to submit it. I just said, I need to have something that I can share. And that provided me a chance to connect around it too. And so looking for those opportunities for accountability and connection with your work. And the last thing is write a little bit every day. Doesn't mean you need big blocks, just little chunks to push it forward, and then take the weekends off, or whatever weekends look like to you. Build in time that you're not working on it. Don't think that you just have to barrel through for the whole leave and never come up for breath. That's not going to be healthy. It's not going to feel good. And the very last thing I'll say, because I know I have taken some time here, is don't go to meetings. Someone told me when I was on leave, I said, well, I really kind of want to go to the meetings. I want to know what's going on. I feel out of the loop. And she said, if you go to meetings, you're creating a culture where other people who don't want to go to meetings feel like they also have to. So even if you're feeling compelled to, or you're feeling guilt about it, I think that's a really helpful thing that was powerful for me to say, it's not just about you, it's about the cultures for other research leaves that you are creating. And I think that's a really great way to give myself permission to do what I hope others would also do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I personally have a lot of questions based on just that. So if folks have questions or comments, and you want to put them in the chat as we go, and then we can revisit them, that would be great. But let's just go to Timothy for now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. As I'm going to put my speaking script up in the chat. So of course I can't do this without speaking out loud about the process, or such as Zoom. So in the chat, you should see the speaking remarks that I have. So good afternoon, RSA siblings, and thank you RSA and Karrieann Soto Vega for coordinating this. I've prepared some remarks for accessibility. Please read along if you'd like. I'm also happy, this is off script, to keep the chat active during the chat. This has been written in, to be spoken, so the punctuation may not look right. I'm a terrible grammarian. This is my cover for being one. Be kind, please. I've written and given this presentation from Boston. This land is the unceded territory of Massachusetts, Pawtucket, and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. Please take a moment to consider the ways in which you work or resist working towards land justice and why. I'm going to front load my advice, then narrate my story, and then repeat my advice again. My story is of an assistant professor on the tenure track. I understand too the multiple ways in which who I am and where I am limits the usefulness of my story and advice, but still I hope it is useful. Please keep in mind that what I've learned and how I engaged my pre-tenure research leave is more complex than I knew X, so I did Y, or now that I've done X, I know Y. Now, the advice. I encourage you to do the following. 1, know yourself as a producer of scholarship. 2, know your institutional context prior to taking a job and what is necessary if you should get a one, meaning a research intensive semester. 3, build external accountability measures. 4, make it a research leave, not teaching prep. And 5, consider carefully what happens after your research leave. Now my story. UMass Boston is, as we like to call ourselves, a research institution with a teaching heart. We teach 2 courses a semester with optional summer courses if we need the money. Editorializing now because it's expensive to live in Boston. And so even with our salary, it's really difficult. It is the only public university in the city of Boston and sits in the shadow of global elite private institutions: Harvard, MIT, Boston University, Boston College, Northeastern, and down the road is our research flagship, UMass Amherst. We are not a book for tenure college nor department, but we are a high functioning research department, and top tier journal publications are expected of us. Knowing the research expectations is vital for preparing for research leave. I set aside what I wanted to do. I asked instead, what do I need to do to get me tenure as a producer of academic knowledge? I asked everyone: my chair, my favorite colleagues, my mentor, should you have a formal mentor, members of my current department personnel committee or the committee that decides on tenure at the department level. Everyone. Ask them the same questions. What do I need to do to get tenure with respect to scholarship? Another consistent question I asked: what have others done at the level of scholarship production that got them tenure? What is your sense of the shifts in tenure expectations above department that are happening? And I kept note about consistencies or inconsistencies. This information is useful for understanding what I needed to produce. During my negotiations, I was told we had 2 course releases that we may use in a single semester as part of a research intensive semester. During this semester, we will not be teaching, but we will need to maintain our service commitments. This meant for me that though I would not be teaching, I would still administer the academic minor I run and teach the capstone internship course with about 5 students who meet every other week during that semester. I also read undergraduate honors and final graduate projects during this time. I was also told I would have to pay back these courses before my tenure decision. So while one academic year I would be teaching a 2.0, at some point before tenure, I would need to teach a 3.3. This payback was removed during our union's most recent contract negotiations, and I'm happy to report that the decision was retroactive to pre-tenure faculty like me. Hashtag thank you, unions. Finally, I did not have to apply for this leave. I simply needed to coordinate it with my chair. Given its givenness, I did not have to provide a post-leave narrative like I would have to do should I get tenure and take a sabbatical. As I would still be required to do departmental and administrative service, there was no disruption to my students nor my program. I simply had to maintain what I was doing there. But it is important to consider what the consequences of your leaving might be and how to facilitate both your leaving temporarily and your immediate return should you have intense service or administrative responsibilities. I decided to take my research intensive leave after my 4th year review and during the spring 2021 semester. Why? 4th year review is our last major review prior to our tenure decision. In my 4th year review, I was told that I needed to have, quote, 1 to 2 well-placed articles. So this language was affirmed as my file went up the ladder. That specific directive was crucial for helping me understand where I was within the expectations of my department, college, and university. This gave me important information and concrete focus. Additionally, time away from teaching during COVID proved emotionally useful. While everyone was scrambling, I was able to remove an aspect of my job that was not done without complicated feelings, but ultimately it relieved a burden in some way. Hear that carefully and with generosity, please. Without teaching, I was left on my own devices. So I looked to build external accountability because I'm lazy and I watch entirely too much television and doom scroll too often for a pre-tenure scholar. So the semester prior to my leave, I applied for the Center for the Humanities, Culture, and Society Faculty Workshop Series. The proposal required I name 3 senior scholars in the field, one of which could function as a respondent, and I had to outline a research project. I named scholars I've never met and proposed a project. A public center, an unknown scholar, a full draft of a project. That's a lot of external accountability. Additionally, I cleared some projects and began drafting a complete article for publication that would be submitted immediately after the research intensive semester. To help with that, I focused on the semester writing retreats that my rhetoric and composition colleagues have been doing since I arrived at UMass Boston. These retreats are a 1.5 day long writing, a day or more for writing, then peer review, and then a day of revision. The ease and joy and rigor of these retreats, coupled with the lack of teaching, let me prepare a full manuscript or nearly a full one in preparation for the retreat, so that by the time peer review came along, I was confident that I had something good. I was able to push out this to a journal by the end of the semester. I was also actively working with my co-editor on a special issue of QED on queer generosity. Because I was not teaching, I was able to focus on the mechanics and organization of the aspect of publication, making contact with authors, communicating with journal editors, managing documents, which was a new experience for me. What I was not doing during any of this time was prepping for the next class I would be teaching in the fall 2021 semester. I love teaching and I publish on writing pedagogy, but other than my capstone course, I actively resisted preparing for courses. It did help that this was a spring leave instead of a fall leave. So one thing to think about is how much space you devote to course prep. If the answer is a lot, then take your leave in the spring rather than the fall and advocate for that if needed, knowing that that's who you are. The summer after my spring leave, I kept going without a sense of urgency. Where I usually course prep a month before the semester, I did so 2 weeks prior to the semester. These weren't new preps for me though. During the fall 2021 semester, I devoted a lot of time and energy on longer projects that was discussed during the faculty workshop series and continue to move toward that. The research intensive leave did what it was supposed to do, help me focus my intention on scholarship, and then allowed me to slow down my plans for other things. It has only been recently that I became aware that the payback was no longer a requirement. I actually learned that today, but this did not mean that I had to think about that I did not have to think about what would happen when my teaching load increased to a 3-3. That pressure was looming during that whole time. I had to prepare for the necessarily slower research output. And because we all teach, this is an inevitability. So mentally guarding yourself for the slower output is important. Talking with faculty mentor in my chair about my progress between 4th year and my up and coming tenure application process is helpful. Almost weekly, I check in with my mentor about what I've done and how I'm framing that for tenure narrative. And I write about my experience during the research intensive semester for my tenure narrative application packet. So I'm storying what I did during that from tenure. I had a year between research intensive semester and the tenure application process. So narrating the experience in ways that acknowledge how I used that experience was something that I worked into my monthly writing practices. So let's return to the top and repeat the advice I have for you today. Know yourself as a producer of scholarship. Know your institutional context prior to taking the job. And I put TT, but it doesn't have to be TT. And what is necessary for you should you get a 1 semester research semester. Build in external accountability measures. Make it a research leave, not a teaching leave, or not teaching prep. And then finally, consider carefully what happens after you leave. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. I love that we have a list of things that hopefully we can come back to if folks continue to, have questions about these suggestions. So, but for now, David Gold, please.
If I had $1 for every time I started speaking in class while still muted, I wouldn't have to be doing this. Okay, I put a link to a Google Doc. I'm not going to share screen, but I did put a link because it's too tiny, but I did put a link to a Google Doc. This will be up through the rest of the day, and then I'm going to take it down just because I fear being recorded and being called to carpet on this. But first of all, I just want to thank Amy and Timothy for their really generous advice, and I would echo both of what they said. And let me share a little bit about my own experience as somebody who is much older and much tireder than I ever expected to be. And the first thing I want to do is acknowledge that it is possible to have a very happy, very successful career in academia without sacrificing oneself on the altar of publishing. Do as I say, not as I do. I have an 8-year-old. It is very cute when I come out and go into his room and I ask, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm writing an article, Dad. How many articles did you write today? I wrote 6, right? On the other hand, when he talks about Daddy working all the time, Daddy, you work all the time, right? And I realize that I am like that narrator in the last verse of Cats in the Cradle. I do not want Oh my God, my child turned. Yeah, I do not want to be there. When I was a graduate student, someone asked Lester Fagley, who was then the chair of C's, who had just come off of years chair of C's, what it was like to be, well published in academia. And he says, well, once a year, I get on a plane and I go to a conference and people recognize me in the elevator and that feels good. And then I come back home and for the rest of the year, nobody cares what I do, right? So I wanted to echo something that Timothy said, and that is in terms of like, what do you need to do to get published? What do you need to do to get tenure? Clarify those tenure expectations as much as it is possible. I realize every institution is different. Sitting on the other side of the table, reviewing tenure files, I often find that it's the teaching intensive institutions that are much more clear in terms of expectations, and the research intensive, has this person, would be good enough to be hired by your department, right, as an associate professor. Whereas, the more teaching intensive, like teaching, or, compare them to the 3 best people in your field and rank them. Whereas, teaching intensive institutions tend to say, we expect X number of publications, right? What well-placed means, right? That's up to anybody. Don't worry, the tenure reviewers can, handle that. So I realize it's not always possible. If you can find out what's possible, people that I've mentored have often said, man, I only need to get 1 more piece done. If you only have to get X number of pieces done in Y number of time, it can be easier than, these vague expectations. So anyway, that said, if you do want to publish, aggressively and repeatedly seek out every opportunity for a research leave, especially locally, right? Everyone applies for those NEH grants. Only 1 gets forwarded per institution. How many of those out of the thousands of institutions that are actually get funded? Local grants, even here at our own research, I don't know why I'm shouting. Local grants, even here at our own research one, you get those notices that say the deadline has been extended. That's because not enough people have applied. I have sat on grant funding committees where there were more grants available than people who applied. Apply for those local grants. If you don't get them, reach out to the person in charge, ask for feedback, apply again. There is no shame in repeatedly applying. Eventually you'll get something. The process of applying, even if you don't get a grant, it's going to advance and it's going to focus your work. And towards that end, I'm going to just copy and paste it here because it may be helpful as well. I'm probably telling you folks stuff that you know already, but these have been helpful for me. Let's see if the copy and paste actually works. There we go. So there are 2 heuristics that I like. One is Swale's, create a research model. Some of us actually teach this. The other comes from just going from various, grant applications and looking at their research prompts. The one from Spencer, NEA, is really, really helpful, right? In 50 words or fewer, explain why my research is important. Or in 50 words or fewer, most scholars now believe X. As a result of my research, ... right? They will believe why. It's critically important, particularly for local grants where the people reading them will likely be other people in your institution who are like busy scholars. It's critically important that you can articulate in plain, everyday lay language the value of your research, why it matters. I read too many applications where people just assume that it's self-evident, or people think they need to impress senior scholars in their department. You need to impress somebody who has no idea what your research is, but can take your word for it that it is trustworthy. Anyway, in terms of applying for research leaves, in my experience, to publish in rhetoric and writing, the most important asset is time. I began my career, I have taught at teaching intensive institutions where I had a 9-course load over 3 quarters. I now have a 4-course load at a research 1 institution. Teaching, service, graduate students, undergraduate students, it expands, as Timothy and Amy suggested, it expands to fill all available time. I've never been able to get writing done during the year. Whatever publishing I've been able to do has largely been a function of cobbling together grants, negotiated time off, institutional grants, administrative releases, and course buyouts. What I would advise, if there is a research grant available that has money attached to it, speak to your departmental administrator, your key administrator. That is the the chair sometimes knows this if it's a small department, if it's a large department, right? Whoever is the highest, administrator, secretary, secretarial staff position in your department, they're the person who's going to know. Your chair is not likely to know. Find out exactly what it costs to buy a course release. It may even depend if it's an internal grant or an external grant, and then ask can a course release be bought? The only exception I would say to that is, for example, if you would otherwise have been teaching over the summer and you can use that money to buy yourself out of, summer teaching, in that case, take the PI pay, but anything that will get you time. Following from that, I would say to leverage time. That is, find projects that can be done cheaply and or can be done locally or digitally and also completed in a set period of time. If you are at a book institution, obviously, eventually, at some point, you will have to get a book manuscript together, but they start somewhere. If you're at an institution where articles matter more, in some ways, that's a little bit easier. So I have a book that I would like to write. Hopefully, I've told people I am writing, so eventually it may happen, on Black women's rhetorical activism during the age of Jim Crow. I want to have a chapter on suffrage. That eventually may happen. Hopefully will happen, maybe at a slower time frame than I imagined it to be. But in the meantime, through the help of a summer research grant and a summer writing group, I was able to get an article done focused on one rhetorical symposium in one particular journal in one particular moment in time. That is, I was able to analyze one small corpus for an article, and the article was actually helpful for getting promoted to full. Eventually, I'll try to turn this into something else. So leverage your projects, do time. Think about minimal publishable units, that's what MPU means, or least publishable unit. It's a term from science and social sciences. Just Google that. It'll be self-explanatory. If you get time off, I will absolutely echo Timothy. Protect it. Do not make the mistake that I did my first year here. I had, my first couple of years here, I had some a sabbatical from, time served at previous institutions, and I tried to be a good departmental citizen, and I went to like 6 different hiring, whatever there's job talks, right? And then, of course, I find out later, were there no senior faculty members at these job talks? Because they were on research leave. They took their leave. They did not answer their email. Do not feel pressured. Do not be pressured. Stand on contractual language. If you have, if you have to have a service duty, that's something. But if you have off service, off of campus duty, do not come to campus, right? No one is going to care in the long run. And Karrieann had earlier raised the question of, is it worth it? What are the potential costs of, taking time off? Timothy and Amy have suggested there is very, very little downside. I would echo that. My first year at Cal State University, Los Angeles, I had a 9-course load, but there was a 1 course off for your first year. I applied for an institutional grant that gave you a course relief. I cobbled that together with an administrative release to end up getting a quarter off. I got some research done, and in my letter from the dean that year, well, it's all well and good that Dr. Gold likes to do research, but this is a teaching institution, yada, yada. And I was like kind of panicked, and my chair was like, first of all, this dean's leaving, is on his way out, so don't worry about it. Secondly, we've had a salary freeze for the last 5 years. It's not going to make a difference. So do study local exigencies, right? Find out exactly what counts for what. So at our institution, for annual review, it used to be 50, 30, 20 for research teaching service. Now they've made it 33, 33, 33, or they still haven't told anybody. You only find this out if you're on salary committee. So if I'm on salary committee and someone got a teaching leave, they only taught 2 courses as opposed to 4 courses, we're supposed to ding them slightly for teaching. But unless you're publishing a book or you're going up for promotion, the best you can hope for is a 1.5% raise. So if you do the math, right, getting dinged for teaching 1 year and then, right, is not going to matter that much. And it's going to be balanced out by getting a slight bump for, publishing the next year. It's unlikely, it is very rare that someone is going to get, and you're going to get hazed, right? So when you go up for full, no matter what you've done, someone's going to find a way to say you didn't do enough of the right thing. So when I went up for full, well, Dr. Gold has done a lot of service at the national level, and that's good, but he hasn't done enough of what we'd expect at the local level, right? Your book was published too early, your book was published, right, too late, your classes are too, right? If you taught big classes, you haven't taught enough small classes. You taught small classes, you haven't taught enough big classes. No one's going to tell you that you haven't taught enough classes when you go up for promotion. So, the caveat, find out the local exigencies, see what will it, is anybody really going to care in a way that will actually affect you beyond, getting slapped on the wrist and being told you need to, teach more. But, getting those leaves, getting that time off, anything you can do to get that time off. And then, as Amy and Timothy suggested, protecting that time, that's what I found helpful and what I would advise to anybody, coming up.
Wonderful.
That's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you. Like I said, after each speaker, I have found this to be immensely useful. But I do want to open it up to folks who are in the Zoom webinar. And so if there are any specific questions that you have for any of our speakers, or just a general question that you have, we would love to entertain them. And while folks are thinking about what questions to ask, I do want to kind of just reaffirm some of the things that you all mentioned, especially thinking about those shifts and local exigencies of what would count towards tenure. It's very important to know, right, like COVID-19 brought so many kind of neoliberal priorities to the fore as well. And so lots of people are changing, lots of deans are going. So at the same time, I think that David's advice about sticking to the contractual language is really, really, like, I'm just blown away, especially because the advice to go to meetings, to not go to meetings, is something that I was explicitly told that I have to do, right? So now I'm like, maybe I should look at my actual contract, right? What does that say about what I have to or cannot or should be doing during the research leave, right? So that's something that I needed to kind of mention, but I definitely see a lot of overlap in the way that you all talked about, how to approach leaves. So anyone have a question that I could throw out there? Give it 30 seconds.
Can I, as people are ruminating on their questions, I want to acknowledge that we were asked to talk about research leaves, right? And should you be in a position where you're granted tenure and research is part of tenure and things like that? But I think what something that David said that makes me want to speak to this is that there are consequences for leaves, either real and imagined, right? There are pressures sometimes by other colleagues. You may be feeling personally like removed from the joy you get with students, and teaching might be something that is really enlivening to you. I think knowing that stuff before and after, to the extent that you can, is going to make your time away from it really, really more productive, so that you're not feeling guilty for leaving your students, and you're not feeling anxious about what colleagues or administrators may be thinking. So really giving the time, not just being excited that you have a leave, but being smart as you prepare for it at the emotional, affective level as well. We have bodies and emotions that are affected by these things. Not all of us can just slip into a spot and let go of the other things that are part of our professions. So I just wanted to mention that part of what's happening here is preparing yourself emotionally as well as intellectually.
Yeah, no, and I must say, personally speaking, that's something that I wasn't prepared for, in terms of, I have not had a break from teaching in more than 10 years. And so to feel that in the moment as the Omicron, outbreak was just forcing people to go in person, all of these things, right? Feeling that guilt. Definitely, I think that this is a good advice to give, Timothy. Thank you. And I wanted to kind of mention the question that was brought in the chat. David Stock says, thanks to each of you. If you feel this is a relevant question, which I think so, I welcome advice on strategies for drafting book proposals and working those into research leaves, as well as the turn conference papers into journal articles advice. I think that both David and Amy talked specifically about using structures like Feminisms and Rhetorics Conference or RSA as a way to kind of workshop ideas. So any advice that you all have?
I can respond quickly to that question in terms of local, national as well, but specifically in terms of local grants, institutional grants and departmental grants. It's really important to find out what the typical, once again, local agencies, what the expectations are for that kind. So we have like all sorts of, we're research institutions, we have all sorts of institutional grants at, various levels and various sizes, but some of them, the expectation is that you will be almost done with a book and you just need help writing the chapter. Others are specifically set up for a one-off or an article or a chapter that you haven't written yet. Others are kind of, set up for that proposal. And I've not gotten some grants because I didn't actually know what was expected until afterwards. So find out, because in other words, there's different ways to spin that, right? So you have your book proposal, right? And you want to actually just work on the whole book, but you're going to tell them that you're going to work on specific chapter, right? Or that you're going to do the writing for the data that you will have collected by the time you've gotten the, it's kind of like, right, when you do the conference proposal for the abstract for the thing, right, you've not yet written. So find out exactly what expectations are. Speak to anyone who's gotten a grant in your institution. Ask them to hawk about it, ask for a copy, particularly if they're in your department, but even otherwise, ask for a copy of that, find out what the local expectations are, and that might help with that first question.
Right, thank you. Anyone else want to jump? And I think there's another comment here. I don't have a specific question. I am on the job market, but have been leaning toward non-academic jobs and have interviewed widely. This is helpful info. I still have a few interviews with academic institutions. So that's a comment from Sally Benson. Thank you. I think another kind of point to make about the writing book proposals that come from a conference presentation or workshopping them, for example, just specifically thinking about Amy's point of Feminisms and Rhetorics Conference, right? Is that you shouldn't feel bad. This is my own kind of like addition. You shouldn't feel bad about kind of proposing a very similar thing to 3 different conferences. Because in my opinion, having those different audiences respond in a way that you wouldn't have heard from in your particular department or institution, to me speaks to that kind of larger place that you have within the field, whether it's in an academic job or in a non-academic job, right? Like if you're doing the research that you want to be known for, that's one way to go about that. So that's kind of speaking back to Sally's point. As an interdisciplinary scholar, I was like, I can't not say that. And other thoughts or points that you all want to make? We still have about 9 minutes.
I have I have so many things going through my head, but one thing that I was already thinking that speaks towards Sally's question is emphasizing that daily writing piece that comes from the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, but is really just about paying yourself first, right? If we're in a non-academic job, or if we're in a teaching intensive job that doesn't have a research leave for 10 years, right? creating that space and making sure that you have that 30 minutes a day that you do maybe first thing in the morning before you check your email, before you open your class. Because again, that's going to expand and take up all the space in the room if you let it. But eking out those little bits of time, I just wanted to remind us that, sometimes that's all we have, right? And even if we're on a leave, sometimes that nap time when the baby goes down is all we have accidentally, right? And so just saying that again, sometimes it takes strange shapes, but really carving out and holding sacred whatever you can, and not letting that go, whatever it is, even if it's 30 minutes each day, depending on different positions you might be in.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I can affirm that has been a lifesaver this whole month. I am currently on research leave, and this whole month I was able to pump out like 3 different things just because of this like daily, I'm paying myself first. It is actually working. So David, I think you have something else, but just to kind of note something that I had mentioned in the chat before when Timothy was speaking is, if there aren't structures like what you mentioned in your rhetoric and composition faculty kind of group, that you had a retreat, right? If there aren't things like that, how would you go about that, or creating one? How useful was it for you? That kind of, yeah. What do you have for it?
I have so many thoughts about this. I'll just really quickly say, this links for me to David's point about applying for as many things locally, internally that you possibly can. And I created weekly writing groups and retreats at our institution. I went to the provost. I said, this is a thing, or the vice provost of faculty development. I said, this is a thing that I want to have. Will you give me some funding? And they gave us funding for some, back in the day when we could meet in person, some coffees and some cookies. And so I created the thing that I knew I needed. And that was quite welcome, because they're like, oh yeah, you're going to do the work for us. But I was like, no, but I need this thing. So this is work that's well spent. And so looking for those local opportunities to create those structures and the collaborators who are interested. I was surprised when I was, creating these writing groups that they actually existed all over the campus. Once I was looking for them and started really asking about them, and there was funding available to support that stuff.
Of course, I'm muted. Can I also say at our institution, we have 2 new co-directors of our writing center, Florian Jimenez and Maria Carvajal Regidor. Maria has, through the administrative responsibilities, has created a faculty of color writing group that expands across the university. I'm hyping her up because it's such a wonderful thing to be able to network perhaps with the writing center, if your institution has one, that there may be resources available there. So there, like Amy was saying, that there are these partnerships across the university that could help support writing via institutional resources as well. But I wanted to plug writing centers at your institution might be a space of collaboration as well.
Oops, hang on. I sent the message to let me send that to the writers. It'll be quicker to say it. Yeah, what they said. Also, think about the national level research network forum. CES, RSA Summer Institute, PATHO. FEMRET has established, mentoring groups, writing groups. Anything that can get you, connecting with others. And I just briefly wanted to say, following, from what Amy suggested. And Timothy as well, like our obligations to our students, those are real. Sometimes they're a little too real because we don't know how to, close off those boundaries. Our obligations to our peers in the field, and, our work is real, families, friends, but our relationship with the institution, and I've only learned this through I'm a slow learner, slow, painful experience. They are strictly and purely transactional. right? Purely transactional. So that's why, when Amy was suggesting, and Timmy was suggesting, right, make it a research leave, not a teaching leave, right? Don't let your feelings of obligation towards the institution, because that's how they get us, right? Keep you from protecting yourself. Yeah, the institution, yes, thank you. Yeah, the institution does not. Yeah, it took me like 5 years of therapy, to realize that. Okay, yes, the institution, you can love the institution, but it does not love you back. And I think that's where a lot of us get hung up, particularly if we're doing service, particularly if we have an admin position. Yeah, so protecting ourselves, key. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you, David. Does anyone else have any last point or comment or question? We have about 3 more minutes.
I feel, maybe I shouldn't be, I feel a little weird. I don't have tenure yet. So for all of those listening, this may not be useful advice to you. If I don't get tenure, then it might all come crashing down. I think it's solid, but and perhaps I don't know, maybe it's a process, and to make use of your pre-tenure research leave, it's always fraught. It's always fraught. And so to find ways for it not to be fraught, if it's putting on your wall, institution does not love you, cannot and will never love you, which Lydia, yes. It's fraught, maybe by design, but it's just do it, work at it, find that space for yourself. And as Amy, David, and I are, and you, Karrieann, having a leave right now, it's possible. And so hopefully you could find networks and space to do it, even if you have feels about it.
Definitely. Any other parting words? I guess what I can kind of, as a way to recap, is to be smart. So use your local, national, international networks, and to have realistic expectations of how it will feel throughout this process. I think that those would be my key, and of course, to know that this is towards a goal that is not necessarily the institution's goal, but your own goal, right? So thank you all again for being here. Thank you to our panelists, speakers, and please be on the lookout for the next RSA Remote. It will be on service roles. So thinking about, negotiating why or how or which service roles to take on. I've served for RSA the past 4 years, not something that I take lightly and have enjoyed thoroughly. So yes, the next RSA Remote will be April 29th. So thank you all for coming. Have a great evening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.